Hi, everyone. I hope you're doing well. Peggy and I are. Peggy is recovering from her surgery and seems to be doing a little bit better every day. We'll talk with the doctor some more Monday and see how that goes. But we thank you very much for your cards and prayers and telephone calls. It's just been wonderful. Your support is and love has just been poured out to her in a very special way, and thank you for that. That's one of the true ministries of the church, and our class is doing a good job with that, and I commend you. And I thank you as a recipient of that. Today, we're going to continue on in our unit on new things, and we're looking at a passage from First Kings today. Last week we looked at Deuteronomy, and there Moses was talking to the people right before they got ready to go across the Jordan River and settle down in the promised land. And he was giving them some guidance, some of that sage advice. He wasn't going to be allowed to go into the promised land with them. And so this was his last words of wisdom for them. And remember, you can summarize what he said with, keep the commandments, walk with God, and fear God. Keep the commandments because you know God's not going to lead you astray. You know he's not going to tell you to do something that's not okay and not good for you and for everyone else. So keep the commandments. Just that simple. Wow. If only we could get that. Then he goes on and he says, walk with the Lord. He says the commandments won't be a burden to you at all if you walk with God, if you keep in relationship with him, if you pray, if you think about him, if you feel him in your heart and you listen for him in your everyday life. You listen for him in the words of your friends and other people of faith that you are around every day. And if you share from your own experience, you testify of God. Walking with God is all those things. And then he says, and fear the Lord. Respect the Lord. Realize God is God. And there's no one else, nothing else in our world and no relationship with anyone else could ever come near the importance and the magnitude of that relationship. So be reverent, be sincere, be honest with yourself about the fact that you really need God. And in that relationship, step forward. What we find today in First Kings, and it's a long passage. I'm not going to try to read all of that. I'm just going to try to talk through the story a little bit and bring out some points about it. So I commend to you the reading of First Kings chapter 18. But there in First Kings, we find Elijah, the prophet Elijah, going to the king at that time, Jeroboam, the king of the northern kingdom. This is after the Jewish kingdom split into a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. Jeroboam was the first king of the northern kingdom after the split, after Solomon died and the kingdoms were split. And Elijah had a hard time with Jeroboam. I'm telling you, Jeroboam married Jezebel, who was a priestess of Baal and who really had a strong influence on the people and really advocated the blending of the two peoples and the blending of the two religions, and didn't see any problem with that and really encouraged that. And a lot of people were, she was someone in a respected position, and so they listened when she spoke, and she did speak, and she said things that were not pleasing to God. And so God said, Jeroboam, I'm going to bring a drought on the land. Now, there was a special reason why God chose drought as a way to show his stuff, because Baal was the god of the seasons and of the weather and of the rain. And if God could stop the rain, surely this would authenticate him as being far above anything Baal could do. And yet, even after 3 years, the people still hadn't gotten it. And Elijah returns to Jeroboam and he says, God has given me a special mission. He wants me to have a showdown, a face-off with the prophets of Baal. And he's asked me to get you to cooperate in bringing those prophets of Baal together with me and others on Mount Carmel and gather the people around so that they can see once and for all that our Lord is God and God of all things. Well, Jeroboam agreed, and Elijah says, okay. When they got there, there was 450 prophets of Baal there, and just Elijah representing God. That's all right. Me and God make a majority no matter where we are, right? Yeah, I know you know that saying too, and it's very true. But there was Elijah, and he said, here's what God proposes. He would like for each of us to prepare an altar for sacrifice to our gods. And matter of fact, I'm going to let you go first. Elijah had brought 2 bulls with him. He says, you choose which bull you want. You prepare that bull for sacrifice. You prepare the altar. You use whatever type of wood and things you need to use on the altar for the sacrificing the animal. And do everything in preparation for a sacrifice except don't set it afire. Well, the prophets of Baal got together, and they did exactly what they were supposed to do, and went about all their rituals and all their formalities, and they had their altar all set up and ready to go. And Elijah says, now, pray to Baal that he will call down a fire to devour the sacrifice. And so the prophets of Baal say, well, that sounds fair enough. Let's give it a try. And so they started praying, and they went through the different rituals, and you can just imagine all the kinds of things that they probably did in the sense of trying to get Baal's attention and trying to encourage Baal to respond to this request to light the altar fire and consume the sacrificial bull. And yet the day wore on, and it wore on, and they were getting pretty tired, and some of them were getting just, very anxious, and so they started dancing and shouting and doing all kinds of things, even more so, really upping the ante of all the display that they were doing and trying to communicate with Baal. Elijah stood back, and seems like he may have gotten a little tickled by all the things they were going through, because he goes over to them and he kind of punches them and he says, hey, you reckon Baal went on a trip and forgot to tell you that he wasn't going to be around today? Maybe Baal took a nap. Maybe you need to wait a while and let him finish his nap, and then you can try again. Well, this of course, made them even more and more incensed, and so they started cutting on themselves, which was something that they did in certain rituals and that sort of thing. And they started mingling their blood with the blood of the bull on the altar, and oh my goodness, and they're calling upon Baal. And yet, as the evening started to fall, nothing had happened. Nothing at all. Elijah says, well, I think I'll take a shot at this. So he goes over to an old altar place had been built for Yahweh, and he rebuilds it using 12 stones representative of the 12 tribes of Israel. He prepares the altar with wood and whatever fuel they want to use to build the fire. He sacrifices the animal and prepares it to be given, and he calls upon some helpers. He says, I need some help here. I've got the altar all set up and everything's ready to go, but I really want to make a point here. So I want you guys to go get some water, and I want you to just soak down this altar. All the wood, everything, I want you to just soak it really good. And they do that. And then after they've done it, he says, that's pretty good, but I think maybe we need to do it again. So they went and got more water, and they poured it on the altar, and they soaked everything down. And water began to trickle out from around the altar and that sort of thing. Elijah had dug a little trench around it. He started getting a little water in the trench, and Elijah says, well, just to make sure, let's do this a third time. So they went a third time and got water and brought it and doused that sacrificial animal and the altar and the wood and all the things, to the point that the trench that he had built around the altar filled with water itself. Now that's a pretty powerful symbol, isn't it? And here is Elijah. And he stands before God and he says to him in the, verse 36, he prays this prayer to God. He says, Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant. I have done all these things as you instructed. That's important. God instructed Elijah to do this. Elijah didn't just say, I think I'm just going to show these Baal guys up. I know I can do this. No. God called Elijah to do what he did, and Elijah followed his instructions very carefully. Elijah had knew about Moses' sermon where he talked about keeping the commandments and walking with God and fearing God. He did exactly like God had told him. And what happened? Immediately the sky opened up with great fire, and it flashed down on that altar, and it was so hot and so horrendously powerful that it not only sucked up the animal and burned it to pieces, but all the wood, even the stones and the dust around the altar was consumed. The fire lapped up the water out of this trench that Elijah had built. And as he does this, the people of Israel, they finally get it. Can you imagine it? They fall down and worship, and they say, surely the Lord is God, and there is no other. God reaches out to us in so many ways to get our attentions. We're so much like these people sometimes. He just does all kinds of things to get our attention. People of faith around us who share their testimony day by day of doing our part. There's a little Elijah in me and in you, in that we're called by God to be his representatives and to be his people. He says, I want you to remember my commandments, and by the example that produces, I want you to walk with me. And I want you to be reverent toward me and be respectful of me and be willing to give an account for that hope that I have placed in your heart. I want you to be willing to worship, and I want you to be willing to share with others. There's two things that are the emphasis of this event. First of all, it wasn't just about God showing that he was God. Elijah already knew he was God. The people were the ones who weren't convinced of that. They had gotten so far off track that they had lost that sense of connection with God. And of course, this reconnected them in a graphic kind of way. But it still was just kind of a head reconnection. Certainly, if we had seen fire come down from heaven and consume that altar and the water in it and all those things, especially after enduring those prophets of Baal all day long, chanting and dancing and cutting themselves and doing all kinds of crazy stuff and getting no results whatsoever. That's what crazy is to keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting it to work out different. Well, the Baal prophets were crazy. But Elijah knew what was going to happen, and it did. And he bore witness to that. He says, this is God. It's not me. It's not the king. It's God and his work and his manifestation of himself. He has done this great thing so that you might know him. Not just the people of Israel in this case, but those prophets of Baal. You know, if I was a prophet of Baal and I was standing there on Mount Carmel and I'd been through all that I'd been through all day long, and then I saw Elijah so easily and so powerfully do everything that we had been unable to do, I might be saying, I'd like to know more about this God myself. And that's the next thing. That's where we pick back up Moses's accommodation, what he said to his people about going into Jerusalem, into Judea, and inheriting the land. Live by the commandments. Trust God. Walk with Him. Have a relationship with Him. These prophets of Baal may have been thinking, maybe I need to inquire a little bit more. And while that inquiry begins here, the object of that inquiry is our heart. To have God in our hearts and in our lives, and to realize that the Lord our God is God. There's a course that I can't remember the first place that I heard this course, but it has just been branded into my brain because it's so perfect. I love it. It's simple, just a few words, but listen to it. Our God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God is an awesome God. Certainly, as Elijah and these Jewish people there on Mount Carmel, they could testify, our God is an awesome God. And I'm sure there was some real revival taking place there. Our world today needs a revival, but our world today also needs testimony and drawing people in to that initial relationship. One of the things I've always said about the word revival is to be revived, you have to have been vibed. The Jewish people had a relationship with God, but it had grown cold, and they had grown indifferent, and they had stepped away from that as being a primary relationship for themselves. They could be revived. But those other people, for them, it was a whole new idea, a whole new relationship between man and God. And they saw a powerful testimony. God is always doing wonderful new things in our world to bring us, His people, back into line, but also with the ultimate and motive of our being witnesses and being able to share with others so that others might come to know as well. And even here in the Old Testament, long before Jesus said, go into Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria and to the uttermost part of the world, here God is showing through His prophet Elijah that His concern is with His people, and His concern is with all people, all of whom have the potential to become His people. I hope you have a great week this week. God bless you in all you do and keep you safe. We're going to try to start the men's Bible study back, not Monday, but Monday week, the 22nd of June. And I encourage you to come if you're comfortable with coming. I understand if you're not. I'm kind of on the fence about that right now. I'm going to come, but I'm going to wear my mask and I'm going to do the things that I need to do to protect not only myself, but to protect those others who are there. And I look forward to that time of learning and growing together. May God bless you as this week ahead. And may you remember just how awesome our God really is.